Welcome to Leadership Where It Matters Most. The family is the most important institution in the world. The future of the church passes through the family. The church has the greatest mission of any organization ever. Go and make disciples of all nations. The family and the church. This is where leadership matters most. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Leadership Where It Matters Most. It is a joy to be with you in this way on the podcast, so really appreciate you tuning in. This episode, I have a wonderful guest, Sean O'Brien, and I say wonderful because Sean is not only a valued guest in the same way everybody else is a valued guest, he's also a very good friend. I've had the privilege of knowing Sean a number of years, and I work with Sean. He's the Chief Financial Officer for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. So Sean and I have a lot of interactions throughout any given week, both professionally on committees and teams, but also informally, often sharing lunch together in my office and just enjoying some fellowship and that together. It's just, I can't tell you how much of an honor and joy it is to work and collaborate on a daily basis with some of the people that I enjoy spending time with. It's just a real honor and treat. John Maxwell has a line that gave me a lot of direction in terms of how I carried myself in this pilgrimage of journey here on earth. And that is that one of his definitions of success is that when those closest to you respect and appreciate you the most, there's something beautiful and holy about proximity and familiarity. Now, why do I say that? Because I can tell you honestly, I'm as excited to have Sean on this podcast and have the conversation with him that we had together as I am any other guest that I've had. And some of those guests, as you know, if you're a listener, are pretty famous. There's some celebrity to their presence. And I certainly value that and I appreciate them and all of their amazing work and all that. Sean doesn't have that quote unquote big a platform, but I tell you, my respect and esteem for him because I see him on the day to day is through the roof. I just have such appreciation for him. So yeah, Sean's a dear friend. He's the CFO for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. We had a wonderful conversation that sounded a lot like our conversations over the lunch hour. We talked primarily about adventure. He shares a little bit about his testimony. He shares a little bit about the family adventure he recently took heading up north for a big family trip. We talk more about adventure in the masculine soul and in the call from God the Father to his sons. So I trust this episode will be edifying to all of you. And thanks again for tuning in. Sean O'Brien, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
It is good to have you. This is a real treat to have a podcast with a very dear friend. So for those of you, or for those listeners, Sean, who don't necessarily know a ton about you, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't know a ton about Sean O'Brien, but maybe for the one or two that don't, why don't you just share a bit of your story for everybody?
I was thinking before you had me on that your guests were lacking a certain boringness. So yeah, I'm most people who are listening to this probably don't know who I am, but my name is Sean. I'm a husband to my wife, Katie. We have 5 children that are ages 2 up to 11. I have to always check that given the month, but that's where we're at right now. I work on the floor above. If you hear stomping on the floor, that might be me. But yeah, I work for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. I've served here as the Chief Financial Officer for, it'll be 6 years in a couple of weeks. The last 10 years or so of my life have been a real change for me through just encounter in relationship with the Lord. I'm a cradle Catholic and grew up very much in the faith, very faithful parents. And as I grew into adulthood, I took on that faith, but I would say in retrospect that my faith is very much kind of an obligatory faith or something we did that was a tradition. And then I guess the real moment for me was about, 6.5 years ago at a men's retreat when I went on this retreat, which you're very familiar with. You were there and a part of this story, but just had a real deep encounter with the Holy Spirit, and it changed everything in my life. It changed what I do for work, ultimately, but more importantly, it changed the dynamic within my family, within my marriage, the way that I father my children, ultimately my own heart and my relationship with the Lord.
That's awesome. 6 years with the Archdiocese coming up in a couple of weeks. Is this the longest stretch you've been with an organization?
Yes.
It has, right? I was wondering about that. So, yeah, full context. Sean and I work together. We spend a lot of time together, not just in meetings, but also informally, having lunch and different things. So it's been an absolute joy to collaborate in the vineyard with you. And this conversation I'm looking forward to. So, and putting a bit of a timestamp on this, because Sean and I woke up to the news, as we all did in the Archdiocese of Vancouver, on February 25th, 2025, that we will have a new Archbishop, that the Holy Father has accepted the resignation of Archbishop Michael Miller 3 years after he had submitted it on his 75th birthday. And the Holy Father has placed Archbishop Richard Smith as the new Archbishop of Vancouver. And Archbishop Richard is currently the Archbishop of Edmonton, has been for 17 or 18 years. Prior to that, he was Bishop in Pembroke. And prior to that, he was a teacher in a seminary in London. And prior to that, he was a priest with the Archdiocese of Halifax, and I believe served perhaps at that time when Archbishop Terence Prendergast was Archbishop there. And Archbishop Terry is a friend who I've known many, many years. So I don't think we're going to add commentary on that. We're just stating a fact because this is all pretty fresh and new, and a lot of that will evolve over the coming weeks until the day of his installation, which has not yet been confirmed. But there you go, just putting a timestamp. So Sean and I are both probably dealing with that today a little bit.
It's going to be a busy day.
It's going to be a busy day after this conversation. So, Sean, when you and I were talking about getting you on the podcast, and I asked you, what do you want to talk about? Because we could talk about a number of different things. This podcast could just be an extension of the wonderful lunchtimes that we have once in a while in my office or your office. And you were pretty quick to say adventure. I want to talk about adventure. And so I just want to ask why? Why so quick to want to talk about adventure? What does adventure, mean to you? Why does it hold such an important meaning for you?
Yeah, usually accountants and adventure don't typically go hand in hand. But yeah, I guess to be just open and vulnerable on this, it's a theme that I've been wrestling with in my own life for, I don't know, at least a few years, and probably longer when I think about it and think about my younger and more formative years. But I also think it's a theme that is very common to men in particular. There's a desire for adventure in our lives, and it's a theme that I think is easily misunderstood as well. And I certainly have misunderstood it at times. I've sometimes placed adventure or sought adventure in, not necessarily in the wrong places, but just sometimes out of order, I guess. And we have this idea of what adventure might look like. And I think in my story, it's been the reason I wanted to talk about adventure is that because especially over the last couple of years, I've really been discovering more and more what that means in my own life. And as I come to grips with what the true adventure of my life is, it fills me with purpose and meaning, which is better than anything else that I can find out there. So yeah. That's why it was a really quick answer when you asked me.
Both you and I have been certainly influenced by the writing and the ministry of John Eldredge and, Wild at Heart. And, when he put Wild at Heart out, he kind of talked about 3 areas of the masculine journey. He talked about a battle to fight, a beauty to rescue, and an adventure to live. And I know that adventure is important to you. And I know you know the word much deeper than just an extreme experience of recreation or leisure or something like that.
Yeah.
Even the fact that you took your family on the adventure that you did last year. Was it last year you went up north or 2 years ago? I can't remember.
It was 2 years ago. Yeah.
2 years ago. I didn't set you up for this, but I'm curious if that was a trip, with a capital A adventure in mind. Like, this is not just a trip that you would go on a typical trip. Was there some wooing there, some deeper calling there? And tell us about the trip too.
Yeah. So I think you're referring to my family's road trip up to Whitehorse, which I think if you drove straight there, it would be about a 28-hour drive one way. So we did the there and back and a little ways around as we went over a course of 2 weeks. I don't know if I've ever told you the story, but I tripped into that. That was never something that we intentionally sought out and planned. As it happened, it became more and more obvious to me that it was an anointed trip. And I really treated it that way as we were preparing for it. But I won the trip at a silent auction at an event that I was at. And the truth is I was going around looking at the items that were on auction. And this one was valued at $2,100 and no one had bid on it. And the opening bid was $350. And I thought, well, that's a great value. I'm just going to start the bidding and someone else will surely outbid me. Well, no one did until actually about 30 seconds before the auction closed, and they put up to $400. And I thought, well, I'm not losing this over $50. So I won the prize. And immediately I thought I'd just written off $450, but it was for a good cause and that was fine. But my kids were there and they seemed really excited about it. And we started talking about, is this something we'd actually do? And, to make a long story short, we did a lot of planning, and it was, we have forest fires, we have things in BC that could easily throw this off. And before the trip, I prayed into it a lot and said, Lord, if this is what you want for us, like, make a way. And I can't tell you, we talk about doing it again. And I don't think we can, because it was so special. It was such an amazing trip. We had incredible weather, no issues with fires or anything like that. And just, it was such a blessed time for us as a family. And I should also throw in that my wife was about 7 months pregnant when we did it.
Yeah,
so
there's that small detail.
It was crazy from almost every angle. We had 4 really small kids, very pregnant wife, and a lot of road to cover. But, it's 2 years later. And if you ask any of my kids about it, they'll just ramble on about what an amazing time it was. So that was certainly, that was definitely an adventure that we took as a family.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, what you're telling me is that nobody was bidding on a 28-hour road trip straight up north? I can't imagine nobody would be excited about that.
We modified it. The prize was actually a car rental from Whitehorse Airport to this log cabin that was about 45 minutes outside of Whitehorse. And you had to fly there. And then we weren't going to fly 6 of us up. So we thought, well, what if we just took the credit, which offset, a tiny fraction of the actual car rental cost? But we rented a big Suburban and drove up. When I told people we were doing it, they thought I was insane. People still think it was crazy that we did it, but it's probably one of the most special memories we have as a family to date.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, one thing she said, and I want to just see if we can explore that a little bit, because you didn't necessarily have a perspective of adventure when you're booking it and doing all that, but you said very quickly, I saw there was more to this. And I think especially for us as men, we can sometimes live in a fog. We don't necessarily see the things as unfolding with an epic lens that perhaps the Lord is inviting us to see. There's that great line out of A Christmas Carol when the ghost of Christmas Past says to Ebenezer, I'm beginning to think that you've walked through your entire life with your eyes closed, like not observing. So as you, as a man, are saying to me, I began to see some signs that this was more than just a trip with the family. Like, can you say more about that? What does that mean? How did that unfold? How did you become aware that there's something greater going on here?
Well, I think one of the ways I became aware of it was from talking with, really trusted friends who, invited me into that discernment. And Eldredge talks about this a lot on his podcast when people just plan vacations, like, yeah, we're going to go to Mexico for a week, we're going to do this, and not judging that at all. But he really encourages people to pray about things before you enter into it. And so that I admittedly, that's not something I had done a lot of before. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, this is my vacation time and I want to do this, and God's not really interested in, what I'm doing for the next 2 weeks while I'm not working. But I don't think that's true. And in this case, there was a lot of just time spent, pondering, like, what is this that you're inviting us into? The whole trip was centered around a destination that we got to. And we stayed 3 days in this one place, and that's the longest we stayed anywhere on the whole trip. But the the best parts of the trip weren't at that place. I mean, it was great, but it was the road. It was being on the in between places and setting up camp and taking down camp and packing up and it's easy to see all those things as, that's just a means to an end. But I actually think it's the other way around, where that is the end in itself. And, that's, people say that all the time, and maybe it's become a little trite, but the journey is the destination, or that kind of thing. But in my experience, certainly on that trip, that was the truth of it. And being aware of, I guess, of asking that question, what is God calling us into here? It kind of opened our eyes along the way, and we saw things that, just were amazing and beautiful, that it's so easy to drive past. And, we live in a beautiful place, and it's very easy to take it for granted because you see the mountains every day, or you see the ocean, and it's there, and but when you actually step back and think, like, wow, like, God made all this and it's spectacular. So I think when we were going through that process of planning, discerning, I think that action itself put us in a posture where we were able to maybe receive more out of that trip than we would have been otherwise.
Well, I imagine, because we used to travel all the time when our kids were small, and, Jesus affirms childlike faith for a reason. And when you're traveling with youngsters, there's such a gift in their perspective. Like, they really bring to our attention things that are very normal that you'd kind of write off as, wow, this is amazing. And I'm sure that was part of the journey too, is just the kids experiencing these things and reflecting back to you the incredible nature of those things that are being experienced, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The childlike wonder is something that certainly I've there's been times in my life where I feel like I'm, very cynical, or, you just lose perspective on things as you get older and experience more of life. But when you see your kids experience something that you might not think is that big a deal, or, again, you take for granted, and you see what it does to them, it sort of opens that part of you back up. And, I think of something like as simple as, we stopped in Barkerville, which, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's an old gold panning town that's basically a museum now. But you can go there, and they've still got the shops set up the way that they were during the gold rush days, and you can, pan for gold. And that's not something I probably would have just done on my own. It's, I thought it was like, it looked like it was okay, but I just, as a mature adult, I would have bypassed that. My kids were really interested in it, and it was just so much fun to see them. You're getting tiny flecks of gold, and they're so excited. And, it just invites you back into that sort of childlike posture that I think is what, I think that's part of what Jesus talks about when he's talking about our posture towards the Father.
Yeah. Amen to that. Wonder and awe. So maybe let's take this a little deeper. Hopefully not purely philosophical or theoretical, but very brief preparation for our conversation, Sean. I went to the Wild at Heart series that John Eldredge had put out, and he's got one video. It's 20 minutes long. We'll put it in the show notes, and it's simply called Adventure, and it's some of Morgan Snyder's story and that kind of thing. But he explains adventure from kind of three different lenses. And I don't know if you've seen this. I'm going to share with you, and then you can riff off whatever you think. But he basically presents, adventure not only as central, but he gives some understanding to it. And the first level of adventure that John Eldredge talked about was casual adventure. And that's kind of like what we're talking about. It's travel. It's going on a ski trip. It's, going fishing with your buddies. It's, certainly it takes you away from the normal day to day, but it's not like the stakes aren't that high. Your stakes are pretty high because you're traveling up north and probably pretty precarious places at times, and you don't want to break down in the car and that kind of thing. The second level of adventure he talks about is crucial adventure. And this is where the stakes are a little bit higher. So, somebody wants to launch his own business, or do something significant for the betterment of the relationship that might involve, something. Or maybe they figure out they've got a bit of a missionary spirit and they want to, do something for the downtown east side, or they want to take a mission trip that puts them in a little bit of a, risk situation in Guatemala or who knows what, right? But then the third level he talks about, which is critical, and that's essentially responding to the call of God into an adventure that you typically don't plan from start to finish. The stakes are incredibly high because it's about your identity. It's about your finishment as a man and things of that nature. So I had not heard those three sort of levels, and they kind of provided me some insight. Is that something that you're familiar with even? Have you heard that one before? I was totally oblivious.
I haven't seen that video that you're referring to before. So, I mean, the concepts he's probably discussed on some of his podcasts, and they're not entirely unfamiliar. But yeah, I think that most of us, when we talk about adventure, sort of are probably on that level one, where it's like whitewater rafting or
right,
backpacking trips or mountain climbing or whatever, those things that you mentioned. I think if I can sort of skip ahead to the third one, those are often, as you said, they're often things that we don't necessarily plan for, but we're sort of invited into them. I love Lord of the Rings, and I love those stories and sharing them with my children. And I often think about Bilbo when he's in The Hobbit, when he's invited to go out with these dwarves on this adventure, and he's super comfortable in his own life and doesn't really want to, but then kind of realizes that, oh, maybe there's more available than, his daily routines, and goes out, I guess, in a more real context. Like to me, these are the things where, like, they could be as big as, real health crises, like somebody in your family is diagnosed with cancer, or you're diagnosed with something serious, and maybe you didn't necessarily invite that adventure into your life, but you have a choice to make, and it's, am I going to embrace this journey and go with the Lord and see where he's taking me? Or, am I going to try to run back to my hobbit hole and find what was there before? But I also think, though, that and this is where my own story comes in, like sometimes those critical adventures, and I don't know if this is what Eldredge was getting at or not, but when I hear that, it's very easy for I jump to health crises or, something like that. But I think that adventure is often found in the day-to-day, and it's hidden. It's hidden in our life, where you're married, you have children, you have meals to prepare, places to drive, things on your task list. And it's very easy to get lost in that and just get through the day. And to be honest, some days that's all you can do. But I think when, at least for me, and this is, I guess when I think about finding the adventure in my life over the last couple of years, it's been uncovering that critical adventure amidst all the daily activity in my life. And I guess when you back up and you talk about, like, what's the epic story I'm a part of, I've got 5 children that I'm raising in a world that is, rapidly changing and all kinds of challenges. And it's always been that way, but it feels this is just my moment to be here. And it can be easy to get lost thinking, like, well, my adventure is like, I got to go start a new business, or I need to travel this faraway place and do these things. And again, those might actually be the calling for many people. But at least for me, when I sort of am aligning my adventure and ordering it in the right way, and the invitation I feel is to go deeper into marriage, deeper into fathering my kids. And when I do that, the stuff that gets uncovered is incredible. And I look at it and think, was I just missing this all these years up to this point? And that's not said in a way that I regret anything or I'm saying ruining lost time, but it's more of it's like, why didn't I have this awareness before of where this, this adventure that's literally right in front of me every single day. And I'm thinking about, well, if I did this thing or did that thing, So yeah, I think that when you talk about, that's what comes to mind for me anyway, when you come
Yeah.
to talk about critical adventure.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree 100%. What was striking me as you were talking about that in Chronicles of Narnia, or you're talking Lord of the Rings, I was thinking Chronicles of Narnia is that, the wardrobe is set within the house that they're very familiar with,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, in the wardrobe, they go to another place and it's another adventure. But I think there's a metaphor there that it's like, it's right there. It's very proximate. And when Eldredge talks about adventure to live and battle to fight and beauty to rescue, it's very difficult to talk about just one without talking about them all. So when you put in that context that you're a husband and a father, and you have a beauty to rescue and a battle to fight, and that is done in the normalcy of the very day to day, then yeah, the adventure can be part of that day to day as well. Like when we have the right perspective, like you're not raising children, you're raising adults who will mature to become beings that the enemy looks at and hates, because when they see him and them, your children, he sees Jesus themselves. And you're raising them to have that kind of impact on the world. And how are you doing that? By helping them tie their shoes and do their homework and serve at mass and all these things, right? But with the right perspective, the epic story is always there. It's always available to us if we see it. I think in particular, fathers give perspective to children and to families in our role of leadership to always have an eye to that level of story that's unfolding. Like we are not living mundane days. It might seem like getting out of the minivan is like drudgery and it's like taking forever, but there's always something deeper that is unfolding.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And as you're saying that, yeah, I think that again, I don't want to generalize, but in my interactions at the soccer field or wherever I am, and I'm with other dads, like it's so easy to fall into the work, weather, sports. That's the end of the conversation, right? And my fear is that a lot of men are going through life and it's just passing them by, and they're caught up in the day to day, which is, there's practical things that have to happen, but it can also be very distracting. And when you zoom out and you realize that your life matters because you have a role to play in this epic that has been unfolding for millennia, like, doesn't that sound a lot more compelling than, I go to the grocery store, I do this and do that? It's like, no, actually, like I was put here for a purpose, and for all eternity, this was the moment that was planned for me. And when you look at it through that lens, it's all of a sudden things take on a lot more meaning and a lot more purpose. And I think that by design, it gives you more fulfillment in all of those things when you're pursuing it as your role in this epic saga that's unfolding.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. I think that the majesty of the moments that our lives are filled with is, unfortunately, it's lost in us. And it's like we live in a bit of a fog and we need to see. But I think there are times when the Lord is concretely calling us maybe to something new or to something adventurous or to something that we don't yet know where it's going to. And that is part of the call to adventure, the call into the wild. And when I think about that, and this thought just came to mind now, I don't even know if I've shared this very much, maybe not with you or in this context, but when I was called out of CCO way back in 2014, I guess it was, I didn't really know it at the time other than having a very deep sense of it. But if I were to explain to somebody the accurate reflection of my heart, what was happening is I felt like sonship was on the line, and I either go on this adventure with my father or I stay where I am. And that was a scary place to be because I was with the movement for, 18 years. So it's not like I left something. I went to something and I pursued something. And I knew that putting myself in that degree of risk, really, moving away from what was familiar into the great unknown, if you will. And not only that, but as a man, taking my wife and 8 children at the time on that same adventure, like you can just imagine how much was at stake. And even at times, very good people who care very much about us would say things like, what about your kids? And just knowing that if this is the adventure that we're called to, everyone is going to be in a better place. But man, that was frigging risky. And in the days as we ventured forward from Ottawa to Vancouver, I mean, we encountered so much difficulty. We ended up in like a lawsuit with the moving company. It was just everything seemed to be under attack. And then the whispering of temptation of interpretation was either you're really blowing it, Brett, or this father that you're trying to draw near to is not coming through for you. And I think that's what is ultimately at risk is those negative interpretations. I'm screwing up or, God's not coming through kind of thing. But so when we talk about this, I absolutely believe in the majesty of the normal everyday life. I absolutely agree with that. But I think there are times, concrete times of critical adventure that the Lord is calling us out of the Shire, out of everything that is familiar and comfortable and gives us routine, because we are unfinished men. That journey that I've been on, I couldn't even articulate to you the environment I needed to mature as a son, as a father, as a grandfather, as a friend, as a leader. I couldn't even articulate it. You just got to step out. And as you're stepping out, you're beginning to see the maturation process in the glory that it is, even as difficult as it is. Anyways, I've been rambling. Any of that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to somebody who, like I mentioned before, I'm an accountant, so I'm very conservative by nature. I don't like risk. I have, barring the first 7 years of our marriage, other than that, I've lived in the same 2-kilometer radius for my entire life. And so you better believe some of those things are hitting right now. You're right. And when that call comes up, and it's in my life, in my experience, I've experienced it more as I've been willing to be more engaged in my relationship with the Lord, and really that concept of sonship and leaning into that. Because, if without that, if someone said, hey, you can leave this thing that you've got going on, it's pretty good, and you can go out into the dark and you don't know what you're going to find out there. If you're just doing that alone, why? Like, there's no reason to do it. Like, it would seem stupid. But when you're looking at it through the context of sonship, and I have a good father who wants my best, wants the best for my family, and has a plan for me, well, now I've got a decision to make. Because as you said, you could stay in the comfortable place. You can keep going. You kind of know what you're dealing with. Or you can choose to step out into the unknown, into that dark place, not knowing what you're going to encounter there. And you have to do it in a posture of trust and knowing that no matter what happens, because, the truth is sometimes stuff does blow up. And the reaction, this is where I think maturity and sonship comes in, because if the reaction is, well, you really screwed me here, then I think we've missed the point. And that's not to downplay hardship, but I think that, when you talk to people who have made that journey and you see where they've gone, and I mean, your testimony speaks to that. You look at what's become of your life because you chose to trust in that call and to follow it. I think that it gives confidence. Certainly, I would expect that it would give more confidence to you the next time that call comes up. But for other people who witness it, it also becomes a light for them and a reason to trust in the Lord when He does make those calls. But I think it's all part of this sort of journey of becoming or becoming finished as a man. And I don't think we're ever finished, but if the rest of my life is just dedicated to becoming more of who I was created to be, sometimes these adventures intersect with that journey, and can kind of grow us in leaps and bounds when we're willing to take that risk.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe there are certain aspects of the maturity in the Lord that will require that kind of environment, and no other environment could give it. And it's not about principles and memorizing scripture and portions of the catechism and all those kinds of things. It's literally a call of intimacy, specifically with the Father, powered by the Spirit, accompanied by his son Jesus. And it's beyond all those other things that we typically think of formation as Christians, memorizing scripture, principles of the growth, or, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So here's my question to you, Sean, because I think inevitably every man, I'll say, we're speaking to men, would be eventually called to that kind of critical adventure. What is it in our hearts that is reluctant to respond? Why do we resist? Why do we resist that call? What is it in our makeup and our fallen design, fallen nature that holds us back? Any thoughts on that?
The first thing that jumps out is fear of failure. I think we don't want to be perceived as having failed at something that we take on. I also think that what we were talking about before, the comfort of our lives. Like, why would I put, life's pretty good. Why would I put this on the line to go pursue something that I don't know the outcome of? And that can be, I often think that's one of the great dangers of the time that we live in, is that, when you look at our time in history versus most of recorded history, the truth is we've got it very easy. Even a couple generations ago, when men are going off to fight in world wars, and poverty, and I mean, not that these things don't exist, but we're very comfortable. I think it's fair to say that our generation is very comfortable relative to other generations, and sometimes that breeds complacency, and the upside of taking a risk doesn't appear as apparent when life's okay or pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think those things are what would be that what would hold us back. And I guess maybe the last thing is, I'm thinking of that. I think her name is Marianne Williamson, but there's that famous poem that she writes where our deepest fear isn't that we're inadequate. It's that I'll get it wrong, but it's powerful beyond all measure, or something like that, where it's, if we truly become the greatest versions of ourselves, like somehow, like there's a part of me that would be like, oh, that might be awkward for the people around me because they're used to me being this way. And if all of a sudden I was this, became the truest version of myself, that might make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there's a hesitation in that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that when I say that, it's like, good. I hope that people are uncomfortable by other people becoming great, because ultimately, what's better to see examples of people pursuing adventure and becoming who they were made to be, or mediocrity. We know the answer to that. So it's a bit of a paradox, because I think when you lay it out, there's a lot of reasons why we should want this, but in our hearts, there's something that holds us back.
Absolutely. Just when you talked about Marianne Williamson, by the way, I heard, and I don't know if this is true, I heard she actually lived in Coquitlam, British Columbia.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Yeah. Anyways, that could be wrong. We'll have to fact check that, I'm sure. But you talk about, our fear is not that we are inadequate or whatever, but, it's that we're powerful beyond measure, whatever that is. And my thoughts again go to the Lord of the Rings story. And that's the hero's journey. And it's so well played out in the story of Aragorn, and there's that great line when Boromir says to him, "You've been living in the shadows, afraid of who you are and what you are." And it's like, oh, that's exactly it, right? And he's pulling him forward. It's like, step into your identity, become who you were created to be. And that is scary as hell sometimes, because the very thing required of us is to step into something, an area, an adventure where we are not guaranteed the outcome. And men typically don't do well with that, because our deepest, and Dr. Emerson Eggerichs has sociologically, empirically proven this, our deepest fear is to be found with others and seen as incompetent or an idiot. And so when you can't control the situation, that is the adventure that you're being called into, it is so risky as a man to step out, to step in, to lean into that which you're being wooed to take on. So we play it safe. It's the continual story. We just play it safe, and prudence disguises fear. And the other end of going out on a limb is the fruit that we all long for. But it's on the far end, and it's scary as can be. But all of those things are just, they're just gripping our hearts. And this is like big adventure stuff. It's also like taking the adventure just to say something is true in the midst of a meeting with somebody or whatever. Like the adventure doesn't have to be a trip 28 hours into the great bush up north, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of truth in this. And I think that there's, when you're willing to accept that call and realize that, the some of the comforts that we enjoy and the safe places or the places we think we're safe, and we're willing to step out on that, what we often find is that there's something way better than what we could have ever imagined. And I think this narrative is found in all the stories we've talked about. It's found in scripture. There's this great quote that I saw, or I heard Jordan Peterson share on a podcast he was doing. I think it was with Rod Dreher. He talked about Abraham, and he's saying Abraham's in his old age lying around being fed peeled grapes, and God calls him out into this grand adventure that basically to become the father of nations. And he's sitting back and in his comfortable place, but when he chose to go on that adventure with God, he found something that was far greater than comfort, or even, he says this in the quote, happiness. Like, we often talk about the pursuit of happiness as if happiness is the end, but I've been thinking about that a lot lately, where happiness isn't really, it's going to sound weird, but it's not all it's cut out to be. In that line, I think the actual emphasis is on the pursuit. And that's the adventure. And when you're engaged in living a life where you're following the call, you're accepting that call to adventure, it fills you with a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I think is better than happiness, or sometimes what we perceive as happiness, which, again, I think we often confuse happiness and comfort or being at ease.
Yeah.
I think it's actually found in a lot of the struggle, in the adventure, the why, what you're doing this for. Like, all of that gives meaning to things that I think you can't find when your end goal is, how can I be the most comfortable?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, happiness, authentic happiness, as a gift from God, because I believe he designed it, is a byproduct. It's the fruit of pursuing meaning and contribution and sacrifice, all those things. And even when you pursue just happiness and you experience it, there's not a level of depth to it. It's so fleeting, and it's like a mist. It can just vanish in an instant. But the ongoing pursuit of meaning, which inevitably will involve a call into the wild and to adventure, leads to a depth of happiness and fulfillment. It's not easy. There was something you said when you were riffing on, the comforts and all that, because so I attended the ARC conference, right, in London, England recently, Association of Responsible Citizenship. And a lot of the people that were there are kind of known as the people in the culture contention space. I don't want to say culture war because it's different. And they made this very clear. Anyone who has been in war will not call what happens on social media war. Yeah. I was like, that's very well said. But they did talk about how our world, and obviously there's, different battles and stuff in Ukraine and, Syria and different places. I get all that. But a lot of people in the West have not experienced war. And it has led to levels of comfort, which elevate secondary things as primary things that we're talking about in the world, right? And a lot of the reason why we're able to talk about these things because we don't have an actual war going on. War-torn countries are not debating secondary things.
Mm-hmm.
They're facing it head on. Anyways, so all that to say that all of these counterfeits that our fallen nature will cozy up to, the comforts, the peace, which is just a lack of strife and difficulty, not a real peace. They have nothing to do with the adventure, the grand, capital, bold, italics, underline, A adventure of life. Nothing. So, anyways, Sean, why don't you, I'm rambling, not you, but I am rambling. Why don't you give a bit of a, I don't know, maybe an exhortation, and you can even speak to those parts of your own heart and my heart that have not yet, gone into the adventure space, but particularly to men, like really exhort men to embrace adventure. Say a few words for the man who might be feeling that call, that whisper into a critical adventure, even now as they're listening to this podcast. Is there some words of encouragement and exhortation that you'd give to them?
I can try.
I'm sure you will.
I think that there's been moments in this conversation where there's been a line or a theme that's come up through the dialogue. And I don't know if you felt this, but there's just something that rises up within you. And you know that that's true. And you desire that authentic adventure. And there are certainly parts of my life where I've not yet embraced that, or I know there could be more, but I'm just too busy, or I'm too comfortable, or I don't want to risk at this moment. And then there may be somebody listening who has, and like me in a lot of ways, played their life very safe. And that there's possibly something more for you out there. And I guess all I would say is that adventures are not all these huge things that are you have to just go from 0 to 1,000 in the first step. And sometimes it's taking the first step in a small adventure. And that could be something like, you notice that your spouse is not feeling great about something. And instead of leaving the room like you might normally do, you might step into that and say, hey, what's going on, or be willing to sit with it, even if it's uncomfortable. You might be talking to one of your kids about an issue that they're having that you don't want to talk about. It might be having a difficult conversation with somebody at work. It might also be spending time in prayer and alone and seeking those places in your life or identifying the places in your life where you feel like, there's something more for me out there. And it might be like, we have friends who find that in fishing or in hunting and it doesn't all have to be stereotypical adventures. Like it might be, maybe it's picking up a journal and writing something down that you've never done before and just exploring your thoughts. And I guess all this to say, like the adventures out there, it's available to all of us. It's not just available, it's almost required, and it's being asked of us. And if you're not somebody who is used to saying yes to that, the first step might be a small yes to something that, maybe there's a little bit of risk. Like for somebody, maybe picking up a journal and writing something down feels risky. But I would just say, do it. Take that first step and then see where it takes you. Because I know in my life, when I've said yes to something that I thought was, maybe I just thought I was taking one step, it ended up being the start of a long journey. And in some ways, I'm still on some of those journeys, and I'm so grateful for it.
Mm.
So I guess the one last thing I would say, and I do this a lot, or I try to do it, when I'm not sure about something and I think I'm being called into it and I've prayed with it and it feels like the Lord's calling me into something and I'm not sure and I'm a little hesitant, I often think, what will Sean in a year from now or 2 years from now or 10 years from now wish that I had done in this moment?
Hmm.
And almost every single time, the answer is that guy is going to wish that I had done the thing that I'm feeling called to do right now. Like I've never had that exercise and thought, nah, play it safe. Like it's totally fine. Right.
Yeah.
And again, I think the more times you do it, even if you fail, because often there's lessons and there's more in the failure, I find, than sometimes when you do something and it comes off flawless.
Yeah.
But the more times you do it, the better it's like a muscle. You build it up.
Yep.
And I think we have a kind father who wants good things for his children. And he's not going to ask you to do something that's going to ruin your life and that you're not capable of doing. So sometimes it's just entering into that in small ways so that you can build up and build into that relationship and ultimately see what comes of it. Because I think for the people in my life that I have seen who've been willing to say yes and to take that adventure, you can't argue with the results.
Yeah. Amen to that. I don't want to lose the greatness of that question that you pose. Like when you're really facing something as an opportunity, whatever it is, feeling of adventure, it could be small, it could be big, to stop and ask yourself, what does, Sean, in your case, Brett, in my case, 2 years from now, wish I would have done, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? That really could inform the decision and embolden our hearts to take the step forward. Because I know in my own life, 54 years on this planet now, and I don't know if I've ever regretted responding to that still small voice prompting me to step forward. Ever. I don't know if I've ever regretted that. But some of the most painful things are regretting those times where I knew and I heard the whisper and didn't respond. So I just think that's great wisdom for listeners. Consider that moment. 2 years from now, what do I wish I would have done? 10 years from now, what do I wish I would have done? That's great wisdom. So, any final words? Again, I just invited you to give your final words. Now I'm asking again.
Just want to express my gratitude for coming on here. I mean, I was thinking before, I only do podcasts that you host. I was on with you and Jake a few years ago, but no, I'm a big fan of everything that you're doing. Obviously, I have a front row seat to a lot of it, but I'm also an avid listener of the podcast and very just humbled to be a guest today.
Well, it's a joy for me to be on this pilgrimage together with you. So thank you for being here. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. I trust this episode has been a blessing to you, and we will see you next time.